It's The World This Week, 7 days, 4 Paris-based correspondents, 1 hour. The World This Week in partnership with the Daily Beast. Daily Beast foreign editor Christopher Dickey is with us. How are you, sir?
Good. You are always so upbeat on that intro. Fantastic. It doesn't matter what's happening.
I love the show. It's a good show.
Right. Well, I love it too.
All right, we'll see how it goes this time. Ulrike Koltermann, reporter and German television producer. Thanks for being with us.
Schönen guten Abend.
Guten Abend to you. Guten Abend to Eleanor Beardsley, Paris correspondent for National Public Radio, the U.S. radio network. How are you?
Very well, Francois.
All right. And John Henley, European Affairs correspondent for British broadsheet The Guardian. How are you?
Jolly good evening to you.
All right. The World This Week on Facebook and Twitter. Hashtag World This Week. It ain't over till it's over. And even then, well, Dateline Brussels, the European Council, stopping the clock 1 week before the UK's due departure date from the European Union. So now it's April 12th if the UK Parliament cannot approve Theresa May's divorce deal. May the 22nd if it does, and otherwise, well...
Personally, I'm really happy about this development. As I said yesterday, it means that until the 12th of April, anything is possible. A deal, a long extension, if the UK decided to rethink its strategy, or revoking Article 50, which is a prerogative of the UK government.
Or revoking Article 50. So no Brexit at all? What does he mean?
It's completely possible. I mean, it's extremely clever. The Europeans have played it very cleverly. The number one priority was not to fall into the trap that they felt they were being set by Theresa May, which was either what she would like to have done was blame them for a no-deal Brexit if a no-deal Brexit was to happen, or she would have been quite happy with a kind of open-ended extension of Brexit with no real conditions attached, and they basically denied her both. What they've done is they've rejected all responsibility for no deal by allowing all possibilities are still open for the British, including revocation. Yeah. But they've really put the pressure on, and they've really said to the British government, you now have to make up your minds, and you have 2 weeks to do it. You have to sort out what you want to do now.
Now, your newspaper reporting from sources inside the room that they pressed her, saying, what happens if the Parliament votes no a third time? And they're reporting as she didn't know what to say, but maybe she's just playing her cards close to her chest, no?
No, she hasn't got a clue. She hasn't really had a clue since the start. I mean, the problem is she has a parliament that is divided three ways, right? There's 1/3 of the British Parliament essentially backs her deal, more or less out of loyalty. A third of it thinks it goes too far, and a third of it thinks it doesn't go far enough. On top of that, she's never yet, or the government has never yet actually defined what they mean by Brexit. So, that's a bit of a handicap when it comes to negotiating with the European Union. The deal's been rejected twice, and those two votes were two of the 4 heaviest defeats ever suffered by a government in British history. She's bringing it back nonetheless. And so it's fairly understandable. She doesn't have a clue what to do if it doesn't.
There's this choice detail from another good newspaper, The Sun, saying starving number 10 aides were forced to order pizza last night, and the PM was sent leftovers as other EU leaders dined on langoustine and red wine as they thrashed out a Brexit delay.
Well, poor Theresa May. But what I don't understand, I mean, now they put the same question for the third time to the Parliament. Why can't they put the same question for a second time to the people? The question concerns the young people, and the vast majority of young people wants Britain to stay in the EU. And since 2016, there are 2 million more new voters who are probably for remaining in the EU. So I think the easiest thing is just to
let's ask, because there is this online petition, and it's up to more than 3 million votes. But my question is, this online petition asking Parliament to consider the a second referendum. The problem is, right, that you have both sides that are energized. Yeah. So what do those 3 million votes really mean?
It's sad to say. I mean, it's wonderful to see. It's impressive, but in the big scheme of things, it's ultimately anecdotal. It's not. I mean, it's not going to change government policy.
But why?
You know?
They have to debate on it.
The campaign was based on so many lies. And so, all these things that were going to happen if we just leave the EU, which are not true now, and they know that. So I don't know.
I mean, she's not going to have a second referendum. I mean, the heart of the problem inside the British Parliament and inside the government is that it is not to do with the future of the country. It's to do with the future of Theresa May's Conservative Party. What she wants to do, above all else, is preserve the unity of the Conservative Party. She has this huge problem. I mean, the position of the Conservative Party vis-à-vis Europe was what caused Brexit. It's what led to the referendum in the first place, and it's what's put us in this mess now. What it means is that she is incapable of, or she will not dare to cross the floor and doing what would happen in most sensible countries, try and find a consensus position, a compromise on a form of Brexit that a majority in the House of Parliament could agree with. She can't do that.
So next week's not going to go well.
The moment she tries that, her kind of hard Brexit wing, the real sort of Brexit nut jobs, there'll be a mass rebellion, and she's lost her party.
We heard Donald Tusk at the outset. Now, if he's good cop, then bad cop at this summit was definitely the French president, with a definite air of let's get on with it.
The European Union has very clearly been faced with a British political crisis. British politicians are incapable of implementing what the people ask them to do. It's a real political and democratic crisis. But this crisis is British. In no way must we become stuck in this situation, so that is why we have given 2 deadlines. We are organized.
Christopher Dickey?
Well, I think the French are having a little trouble understanding what's going on in Brexit, as indeed the entire world is having trouble. I think John did an admirable job of explaining. But the fact is, Ulrika's right. Why not have another referendum? Why is the first referendum an example of democracy when it's based on lies, and the idea of a second referendum somehow would be a refutation of democracy? I don't get it. If ever there was a case to be made for a referendum, and I don't like referenda, this would be it. You've got a total stalemate in the governing body. It can't move forward. It doesn't know what to do. Why not have a second referendum? The only reason is exactly what John was saying, because this isn't about the future. It's not about the young people. It's about Theresa May's old, I was going to say something slightly obscene, about the members of her party.
That is, well, why not have a referendum to have a referendum or not? Let's have a referendum to see if we should hold a referendum. But I also have a question. Everyone blames Theresa May. She's been humiliated. She can't do it. And I think, but who could do it? Nobody knows what they want. So is it her fault or is it impossible?
It is absolutely true that nobody. I mean, that is the big problem. The Brits voted for in this referendum. They, by a narrow majority, they voted for a departure, but they did not vote for a destination. And Brexit has never been defined. That's the problem. Yeah. But interesting on this referendum question. I mean, should the vote lose next week, which it looks at the moment like it probably will, then there will be a series of what they're calling indicative votes in the Parliament, right? So there will be probably 7 different options laid out, presented by the government.
Which will all be rejected like the last time, right?
I mean, I think even a deeply divided British Parliament will have to understand that it's got to coalesce around one idea or another. And one of those ideas will be a second referendum. Yeah.
But the thing is, even if there's a Brexit deal, it's just the beginning, because then they have to start to negotiate again. We are in for years and years of negotiating of new trade agreements, and every new agreement has to be accepted by all remaining members. So really, it's in the interest of everyone to have a second referendum.
We're heading towards Brexiternity.
We're talking about Brexitension and
Brexiternity. I like Brexiternity. But you know what it reminds me of? And I don't like sports metaphors very much, and I don't like soccer very much. But it reminds me of overtime in soccer, where you don't really...
We call it extra time.
Oh, yeah, whatever. You see? Extra time in soccer, where you don't really know until the end how much more time is going to be played. But this is a game where both teams have been completely incompetent. Scoring own goals all over the place is kind of an undecided game. And we don't know how long
whatever happens is the end of the Conservative Party as we know it and the end of the Labour Party as we know it.
If this vote doesn't get through, then I think there's a definite chance, certainly, that the Conservative Party will be in trouble. I mean, it's deeply, deeply divided over Europe. As I've said, this is
so is Labour, right?
Brexit.
There's a big disconnect between the voters and the people they've elected.
Absolutely. I mean, what this really shows, to quite a kind of fundamental degree, I think, is the degree to which the political system in Britain, the kind of the first past the post system, electoral system, and the very adversarial nature of British politics, has meant that it's completely impossible to find a consensus. Any sensible, well, France is maybe a little bit different, but a lot of European countries, you look at the Dutch, the Danish, countries that are used to kind of coalition governments, to consensus building, to kind of compromise forming, they would have sorted this. It's just not possible in Britain.
Even in Germany, with the splintering that you're seeing of the political landscape, you think it would have been able to find a...
I guess so. I mean, it's going on for so long. It's such a waste of resources on all sides. I mean, on the British side, and look at the European summit. They can't even talk about subjects that really matter because everything is cannibalized by Brexit. There's global warming. There's the weakness of the economy. There's a migration crisis. Yeah. No one is talking anymore about it. Everyone is talking Brexit. And to what end?
Well, in England, Brexit will solve all that, right? I mean, that's what we were told a couple of years ago.
Yeah. One of the key themes, and we heard it Wednesday night when Theresa May spoke outside of the Commons, inside Downing Street, was this idea of the will of the people, pitting people against the Parliament, Eleanor Beards.
Well, again, I look at it and there's so much criticism of her, and now everyone's criticizing her for dared to have said that. And they're just piling on her. But I was there when she called the election, I don't know, was it last year? And Corbyn was running. And someone said to me at that time, why can't we have someone like Emmanuel Macron? It was a British person. They said, why do we have Jeremy Corbyn and Theresa May? And that's supposed to inspire us. So I really don't know. But one thing that has struck me is, we're talking about it tonight, and I know that's all they talk about in Britain, but nobody talks about it in France. Nobody's concerned. I was listening to the news the other day with all these votes coming up this week, and they were talking about the Michael Jackson documentary more than they were talking about Brexit votes. It's like it's done, it's gone. It's never mentioned, except for on talk shows like this.
Yeah, we've been saying that for a long time, and Macron's essentially saying that. I mean, from early on in the Brexit phenomenon, the attitude of a lot of the French was, goodbye.
Let's talk
it's
about.
Like you did it to yourself. Sorry, but you did it to yourself. So.
Well, it's not only that; they've always been troublemakers in the European Union.
Well, they have, yeah.
Let's talk about what the French are talking about, and that is also the will of the people. You have competing narratives on that score. Last Saturday, Paris saw some of its worst rioting since the Yellow Vest movement started last November, the smashing of the upscale Fouquet's Brasserie on the Champs Elysées, as well as a newspaper kiosk you can see there. While at the other end of the right bank, 40,000 marched to save the planet on the heels of a giant Fridays for the Future. The turnout by students. There we only have the images of the yellow vest,
and that tells you something right
probably
there,
tells you something. Something right there. It's incredible that you have these two sort of phenomenons happening, and again, it's this question of a generation gap that Ulrika was mentioning when it came to Britain between when you compare the yellow vests to those students who are striking for climate change.
Well, I think it's very important that people understand that the violence of the yellow vests has always been key to this movement. We keep talking about the yellow vests as if it's a big social movement. It's never been a big social movement. There was a brief period when there were a couple of 100,000 people who turned out to protest against an increase in fuel prices, and the numbers have gone steadily down. But they know that if they do this, they will get a lot of attention. And there's also this effort to separate the yellow vests from the casseurs, the people who break things, and to separate them from the black blocs. Well, I've been out there every goddamn Saturday for this stuff, and I can tell you there's not a lot of separation between them. They applaud the black blocs. They love it. After Fouquet's was burned, I was there minutes later, and the yellow vests were pulling chairs out from Fouquet's and sitting on them on the street and talking to each other and laughing and saying, "I'll order some caviar." They thought that was hilarious. It's a general screw the system attitude by these people. Screw it by burning the kiosks of these guys. These guys are not rich, the ones who run these kiosks. They suffer. This guy, that car, that's burning somewhere near the Champs Elysées. I've had cars burned in front of my house. What were the cars they were burning? They weren't burning Bentleys and Mercedes. They were burning a smart car because it was easy and they're thugs. Yeah. There's no excuse for these people. Okay, come on, defend them. Come on.
Well, I went out in the beginning, like you said. I went to many of the roundabouts around the country. I talked to when there was a lot of women in the movement, and these people I spoke to were not racist, and they were not prejudiced. We talked about like these pictures of Macron where he looked gay, and this woman told me there's nothing wrong with being gay, you know. And so these people they had their complaints, and it was a real movement at some point. But it's true, it's just a rump of a movement now. And I quit sort of following it, and then last week happened, and it's disgusting to see this violence.
The big problem is that the government is not capable of dealing with these violence, and now they're not sending in the army, which was reported like as if it was the soldiers attacking the demonstrators. It is not happening, but they are reinforcing the soldiers who are protecting buildings. But it is a risk because if these guys are attacked by yellow vests, they don't know how to handle it.
Soldiers are not cops.
We're going to talk about the security response when we come back. Stay with us. You're watching The World This Week. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's The World This Week. The World This Week in partnership with the Daily Beast. Daily Beast foreign editor Christopher Dickey is with us, as is reporter and television producer Ulrike Kolterman, Eleanor Beardsley of NPR National Public Radio, and John Henley of The Guardian newspaper. Just before the break, Ulrike making the point about, the French authorities caught off guard after the Yellow Vests movement, which turned very violent here in Paris last Saturday. The French government, which has banned demonstrations on the Champs Elysées this coming Saturday, as well as in the city centers of Bordeaux and Toulouse. Now, the government sacking the police superintendent in the capital, embracing itself for what the organizers call a 19th act, a 19th Saturday of Yellow Vests movements. The call going out to rally in cities like the French Riviera resort of Nice, where measures have been taken to step up security.
In Nice, we've always had protesters who weren't in the business of causing damage. But the fact that this was called for on social media, that scares us, because it means that there are people coming from outside, perhaps to cause damage, and that means it won't be our yellow vests.
Yeah, and that brings us back to what we were talking about just before the break, this sort of split between those who attend the main the rallies that get violent. And by the way, it's not just Paris, it's also Bordeaux and Toulouse especially. But
and the countryside. I mean, this is where it all started. There are the people who have their little house, they are still employed, but they fear for their future, and they were afraid of the fuel tax increase, and they are still there. It's completely underreported. Everyone is focusing on the violence, and I agree they cooperate, but they're not the same. There are the black blocs and there are the yellow vests, and they just benefit each other.
They get the black blocs are applauded by the yellow vests who are out in the street.
Yeah, I saw that, but still, it's different.
I'd say that's close enough.
It's totally distinct.
Well, it doesn't have to be all of them. It creates the environment for them.
At the same time, you still have the people on the countryside, at the roundabouts, who are there for months and months and months.
I understand that, but 90%, almost 90% of the population of France lives in cities. The people in the countryside, you're right, they are very underprivileged compared to the people who live in the cities. I understand that they would be resentful, and I understand especially that they would be resentful when Macron, for environmental reasons, raises the taxes on diesel and gasoline, which was the incentive for these initial protests. Maybe our viewers don't know it, but the reason they're wearing yellow vests is because everybody's got one in their car. This was about driving. That was what it was originally about. And I completely sympathize with the people who felt screwed by those policies. But that was a long time ago. This is Act 19. This doesn't have a goddamn thing to do with the price of gasoline. It has everything to do with an anarchist, both literal anarchists and emotional anarchists in French society.
And the lack of response of the government, obviously.
How's it supposed to respond to this?
Underestimated
What's
the
it
crisis.
supposed to do? What is it supposed to do to this? Bring back order? I agree. Bring back order.
Well, the government has been, well, when they cracked down too hard, there was the man who had his hand blown off.
Yeah, because he picked up a flash
bomb. He did, I agree, but that is horrible.
I mean, he should win a Darwin Award.
No,
He's
it's
an
horrible.
idiot.
But they're scared. There's going to be a death, and the police are going to kill somebody, so they were being very cautious. They didn't want to kill anybody.
Do you know why the police use so much tear gas?
Is enough. I mean, the people are not allowed.
So
if they go to the Champs Elysées for the demonstration, these demonstrations were never registered. So they have
my heart
laws.
Bleeds for him, Ulrika.
I mean,
really? I'm not Henley.
John Henley.
There's, of course, there are very legitimate claims that originally lay at the very root of this. There are a lot of people in France, as there are a lot of people across Western Europe, who feel that they're underpaid and overtaxed and have a lot of trouble making ends meet.
And a resentment towards the capital as well.
If the original French Gilet Jaunes and the people who are still on the roundabouts, I agree with you. If they had lived in the north of England, they would have voted Brexit. It's exactly the same kind of. It's exactly. Look, we've had enough of this system.
Yes.
It's not helping us. We can't survive in it. It's exactly that feeling. It's just a kick in the teeth for the establishment. But yeah, Christopher is absolutely right. It has been taken over by the black blocs, by the ultras, by the hard right, the hard left, and the people who just really want to do serious damage. And that becomes a serious.
And the spectators. There is a significant part of this that is a spectator sport. People come in from the countryside. They pack their lunches. They watch you trash the Champs Elysées.
Yeah, but we are not talking enough about the answer of the authorities.
Well, what is the answer of the authorities?
Don't
Ulrika?
let them march on the Champs Elysées. There is a law. You have to register a demonstration.
That's what
They never did it.
And now they're going to wind up in my neighborhood.
Now they haven't. They are not allowed to march on the Champs Elysées anymore. But who cares? They never asked for it. So there is no need to declare new measures. They just have to implement the law that exists already. And that doesn't happen.
They'll go somewhere else.
It is actually also very, to be fair to them, when the weekend, the Saturdays where there wasn't this extraordinary amount of, extraordinary level of violence, that's because the route of the march was stuck to and was adhered to. The problems arise when you have these small groups of, a dozen or 20, very, very determined. The guys in the ghouls and the black balaclavas. And when they start to peel off and they can get into the side streets and they can cause...
I just want to bring it back to what we were saying, because you have on the one hand, and you were saying it's not just France, this feeling of being disenfranchised by people who feel as though globalization has
left them behind.
And on the other hand, what we're seeing every Friday, and we've talked about it on this show, these Fridays for the Future marches by students started by that Swedish teenager Greta Thunberg. These images are from Oslo, one of the cities where middle and high school students this particular Friday took part in those student strikes. The protests have been going on here, and last Saturday, we had big marches last Friday on Obersee, and then last Saturday, we had, at the same time as the Yellow Vests were on the Champs Elysées, 40,000 people.
And no problem.
And we're showing pictures.
And no one was talking about it.
And the world is talking about...
Well, those are pictures from today.
Yeah, no, I know. It's a scandal, and I was emphasizing that in my reporting because I know people are canceling their trips to Paris and right and left, and there's absolutely no reason to. And I even talked to a friend of mine in Burgundy, and she said, we can't come to Paris on Saturday. I said, are you kidding me? But even the people in Burgundy are scared to come to Paris. So.
All right, so how do we bring people around to this conversation? By the way, the extreme weather is real. Our thoughts go out to viewers in Zimbabwe, Mozambique, and Malawi who've been hit by Cyclone Idai. And the news we're getting from there is disturbing and alarming. How do we? What do we do?
Well, I keep waiting for the French, which a poll just came out. So now 58% denounce the yellow vests in their movement. But 58, it should be 98. I don't get that. Why aren't people saying, okay, enough already? And I think it's going to take that. The yellow vests, whoever they are, they look at that support and they say the French are behind us. And
well, yeah, but let's talk about the environment for a second. I mean, I think the kids are exactly right. The older generation is completely destroying the planet. They can't get together the political will to raise the costs of carbon. That's what Macron, by the way, was trying to do when he imposed the taxes on gasoline and diesel. And we have a president of the United States who is constantly saying, you see what a fool Macron is to sign on to the global climate
How'd that work out
report.
for you?
How'd that work out for you,
Saturday.
Macron? Every Saturday, because as far as Trump is concerned, the yellow vests are all protesting against the environment, the effort to make a cleaner environment. So there is a real kind of opposition there between young people who want desperately to be able to survive in the future and people who don't want to pay for it.
I think it's embarrassing for Macron that the French students are out in the streets and they are fighting against climate change, whereas the president himself, who started as someone
he went to the rostrum of the UN
and got a prize and won Planet Summit and who wanted to save the world, and then after a while he totally forgot about his ecological program because of the yellow vest movement. But
wait a minute. You're saying we should give the yellow vests what they want, but we should keep the environmental program, right?
I think the environmental program is quite important.
How do you do that, Ulrika?
I'm not saying it was a good idea to throw 10 billions of euro to the yellow vest movement. I think the environment is much more important than the yellow vest.
So wait a minute, if I'm getting this straight, Ulrika, what you say is that the government needs to be harder on the yellow vest. They need to crack more heads, keep them off the Champs Elysées.
They don't need to crack heads, they just need to implement the law.
And also raise the taxes on them.
No, if Ulrika, they start implementing the law...
the French are not going to like German rule.
It's not the German rule.
But I must admit, I was very, very impressed by the French school kids. I mean, they learn protesting young in France. Don't they? You have to admit. And some fantastic placards. You know, it was.
On Saturday on National Public Radio, you're airing a report about the WWF.
Absolutely.
Which is 50 foods for healthier people and a healthier planet. So it's not up to just politicians, it's up to us to, change our diet.
Well, absolutely. I found out when the World Wildlife Fund backs a campaign to eat diverse food, you're thinking, what's going on? Because actually, this is a stunning figure. 75% of the food the entire planet eats comes from just 12 crops and 5 animals. And 60% of what the entire world eats comes plant-wise comes from 3 crops: maize, corn, and wheat.
Sorry, maize is corn.
Sorry, maize, wheat, and rice. We are destroying the planet. The animal species has declined like 60% in the last 50 years because of global farming, and that is our big problem. Emissions, pollutions, over-farming the land. And so when you see this, wildlife teaming up with Nor Foods to make people eat differently, it's shocking. And
what are we supposed to eat, Eleanor?
You're supposed to, I'll tell you. Beans.
Insects.
Beans. No, it's nothing crazy. It's like, beans or different varieties of wheat. Yams. Quit eating white potatoes all the time.
Cactus did make itself on
cactus and algae, but lentils, tubers, so root vegetables, carrots, but there's tons of things we could eat more of, and everyone's just sort of eating the rice and the corn and the wheat.
I'm having broccoli for dinner, actually.
All right.
Good.
It's been exactly a week since New Zealand's worst ever terror attack with the South Pacific nation, showing the entire planet what tolerance and resilience looks like. After the attacks, it left 50 dead in 2 Christchurch mosques. This Friday, the Muslim call to prayer broadcast nationally. This in a nation where less than 1% of the population practices the Islamic faith.
We're all from humanity, and whatever somebody chooses to believe, I'll support that. I think that today we can show that we stand with them, and we will into the future, that this isn't a one-off, or this isn't going to end today, that this is about going forward together and going forward in solidarity, that means more than just words, that means like how we're going to change how we live our lives and how we go forward as a nation, that's really important to follow through with what we're saying today. Yeah.
So many variety of people, like ethnicities, nationalities, so we're all here together and show our respect and support to our Muslim brothers and sisters.
Rika Coleman, your reaction to this?
Living in France, I'm amazed how relaxed their attitude is toward the headscarf. Just think about that. A few weeks ago in France, there was an outcry about hijab for joggers. For female joggers, everyone talking about that as if it was a huge issue. And now seeing something in New Zealand and solidarity with Muslims and people just wearing the headscarf out of solidarity because the Prime Minister does it as well. I think it's
amazing.
We've seen all kinds of acts of solidarity this week in Christchurch. A biker gang defending a mosque. We've seen even the Crusaders rugby team talk about changing the name of the club in the wake of what's happened.
And I think we should absolutely also salute a Prime Minister who has shown empathy and not afraid to show emotion. She's broken down. She's hugged people. She's taken action. I mean, an absolute model, looking at my country and several others of what a modern leader should be and how they should act.
All right, lots of reactions on the hashtag World this week on this story, including this one saying Jacinda Ardern deserves the Nobel Peace Prize, the way she carried the whole nation. It's beyond words. She is a symbol of peace. She's done more than just symbolize peace. In the 6 days since, just 6 days after the attack, she slapped an immediate ban on semi-automatic weapons. She's taken U.S. social media giants to task over the Australian suspect's Facebook Live broadcasting of the shooting, and more broadly issued this global call to take on white supremacists.
I would make that a global call. What New Zealand experienced here was violence brought against us by someone who grew up and learnt their ideology somewhere else. So actually, if we want to make sure that globally we are a safe and tolerant and inclusive world, we cannot think about this in terms of boundaries.
Christopher Dickey, what impact will the words you heard there in that interview with the BBC, what will they have?
Very little. I mean, I think it's a wonderful sentiment. I completely agree with her goal. But I'm afraid it's the whole trend is in the other direction. We're continue to trend toward more white nationalism, more violence. In the United States, more guns. We have a president in the United States who makes excuses for all the things that she's criticizing, are all embraced, if not explicitly, implicitly, by the President of the United States. So I think while he may condemn the massacre in Christchurch, he's been very reluctant to talk about white nationalist terrorism. This is a man, remember, who was always ready to talk about Islamic terrorism. But white nationalist terrorism, no, that's not a problem for Donald Trump.
Yeah, there was the Economist pointing out how in the West over the past decade and a half, twice as many people have been killed by Islamic terrorism, but the numbers on white supremacist terrorism is going up the last couple of years.
Yeah, the last 2 or 3 years, it's gone up dramatically. And look, I mean, I'm not a white supremacist and I don't hang with them very much, but the fact is there's every indication that they feel that they have been given license by the politics of Donald Trump and the Republican Party. They're pretty clear on that. In fact, the monster of Christchurch was explicit about that, saying that he thought that Trump was basically a good example. So I think that when you've got a situation like that, when the leader of the free world, when the leader of the country that's supposed to be a paradigm for reason and democracy acts the way Donald Trump does, of course that encourages the lunatic French to try and be the lunatic middle.
Also, just coming back to what Jacinda Ardern said about that this is really a global issue. The Christchurch gunman titled his manifesto after a book by a French far-right, the Great Replacement, Camus.
Yeah, this conspiracy theory about
that basically Muslims are sort of there's a displacement
which used to be an anti-Semitic plot.
And yet, John Henley, right now we have this campaign for the European elections by the Hungarian government, talking about this Jewish billionaire who's funding this plot for Muslims to invade Europe.
Yeah, I mean, where Christopher, it does sound surreal, but it's exactly what Christopher was saying. It's Christopher was saying. We are sadly in a world where the trend at the moment is towards increasing nationalism.
But if you look at these white supremacists, they are very similar to those guys they are supposed to fight.
Oh, exactly.
The jihadists, exactly the same method. Yeah. They have exactly the same techniques, and they are also on social media. And this is the next very urgent issue, because this massacre was broadcast live. So there's a big question: how can we deal with that in the future? Because there's no artificial intelligence who can discover and detect these kind of images, because for that they need a broad database, and luckily there's no broad database. But so it's a very difficult question: who is responsible to censor these images and to avoid that it happens again, that it's broadcast live?
Well, you know who didn't censor those images and who broadcast them all over the world to their followers were Al-Qaeda and the so-called Islamic State. On their official media and in their chat groups, they were putting those images out everywhere with their own narrative of them. It's perfect for them. And let's just be clear, the kind of white nationalist terrorists that the monster of Christchurch represented, they want that to happen.
But also Erdogan is using these images.
Yeah, let's talk about Erdogan. At the other end of the globe this Friday, New Zealand's Deputy Prime Minister attending an emergency session of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, a meeting called for by Turkey. There, the president hailed Jacinda Ardern as an example of empathy and solidarity with Muslims. Quite a different tone from earlier in the week when Recep Tayyip Erdogan was on the campaign trail ahead of local elections in Turkey.
We've been here for 1,000 years, and God willing, we'll be here until doomsday too. You will not be able to turn Istanbul into Constantinople. Your grandfathers came and saw that we were here. Then some returned by foot, and some returned in coffins. In the event you come with the same intentions, we're waiting for you. Have no doubt that we'll send you off just like your grandfathers.
He played the Gallipoli card there, allusion to that battle of World War I, which involved New Zealand and Australian troops against the Ottoman Empire, John.
I mean, and also the parallels also with Orban and this spectre, of immigration, and in countries particularly like Orban and like Hungary and Poland, which actually have, if you look at the actual numbers, I mean, it's infinitesimal numbers, and yet this kind of horror story that we're being overrun by the Muslim hordes, and it's a complete fabrication.
Well, it was instrumental in the Brexit vote. Yeah. You remember the posters that were up all over the place? But, there's always this tension between fear and hope in politics. And we would like to think that hope is a winning issue. But what we've seen over the last couple of years is that fear is much more effective. And that's what Orban plays on. It's what Trump plays on. It's what Erdogan's playing on.
All right, we'll see how Jacinda Ardern's message carries. I want to thank you, Christopher Dickey. I want to thank as well Eleanor Beardsley. I want to thank as well John Henley, Ulrika Coulterman. Please stay with us, though. Media Watch is next. We say hello to Simon Harding. I believe you're here to pile on more Brexit pain.
Yes, the latest episode in the Brexit saga. It's just a non-stop, really, at the moment. For anyone who's just joining us or just listening, just a reminder of what's happened. The EU approving an extension, of course, but on condition: one, without conditions, which would see the UK exit on the 12th of April, and one with conditions on the 22nd of May as a new Europe put forwards. The New York Times saying it is a chaotic departure. That still looms, Francois. Of course, people are not reassured by this latest decision by the EU or by Theresa May, it must be said, and there's still this idea that, you know, chaos is still just around the corner for the UK. Politico, this was actually an article that was published yesterday, but saying that the EU has
Paul Taylor
no
was often a
choice.
guest here.
Absolutely, and we were talking about the whole idea that, of course, both countries, despite standing their ground, need each other to find a solution to the problems which are going on. The BBC, simply with this headline, Brexit, what just happened, which I thought was quite funny because it really highlights the confusion surrounding everything that's going on.
There were a lot of your compatriots scratching their heads.
I was scratching my head. I still am, I think, after reading this. But it is actually a very good read for anyone who wishes to have a bit more understanding as to what's been going on. This, a cartoon in The Guardian today. Let's get on with it. Theresa May there, feet coming out of her neck, head in hand. So kind of depicting the current climate here. It's all your fault, I'm in this position. And you see Theresa May really backed into a corner as she paints the Brexit closer and closer. Another cartoon from The Guardian here. Anything longer than a short drop is a resigning issue for me. And of course, it's Dali, a very famous painting just there. Move on to some reactions. New Stump, anti-Brexit petitions signed by 3 million. I know you were talking about the petition in yesterday's edition. Today, once again, 3 million. Absolutely huge number in such a short amount of time, as people are really considering to revoke Article 50 altogether. Ian Blackford, again, talking about...
this is the leader of the SNP in the Commons.
Absolutely. The SNP, the Scottish National Party. Leave EU, however, to give another opinion. Brutal from Tory MP. Conservatives now in open revolt against the appeaser who delivers failure after failure, with a picture of Theresa May here at the bottom and Churchill, the national hero, there, as if a callback for him to come back. And finally, Have I Got News For You, which is a satirical UK politics show, saying as he comes under pressure to back the petition to cancel Brexit, one man has a quick check to see if Chuka Umunna has signed it first. Jeremy Corbyn there.
Because we saw Jeremy Corbyn storm out of a meeting, cross-party meeting, because this Labour Party defector was there.
Yeah. I mean, that's one of the big untold stories of Brexit, of how different it might have turned out had we had a decent opposition.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there for now. On that cheery note, many thanks, Simon Harding. I want to thank our panel once again. Thank you for joining us here in The World This Week.